What was the creepiest, probably paranormal thing you've ever seen? Had to put my dog down. Next day, heard him distinctly run into my room, look at me, and sniff like he used to do when alive. Saw no physical body but knew my dog was present. After that, never heard or felt my dog again. It was like he was getting one last gag at me before moving on. I was deployed back in 2016 on the USS Carl Vinson and I normally worked midwatch. 2200 to 1000, and this was at the start of the deployment. One night I look up from my monitors and see this little girl in a white dress, maybe 8 years, looking at me from the corner of the room. I remember staring at her long brown hair with bangs, and she seemed excited. Then I looked over to my other watchstander, looked back at her, and she was gone. WTF, I thought that maybe I was just tired. But then, the next night I was standing watch, same time, I thought I saw our deputy, held by THR role of a captain, walk towards my desk and his dress whites out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was strange to see him all dressed up. I remember seeing the shine of his medals on his chest, and I looked up to give him a proper greeting, but he was gone. The next morning my relief came to take over the watch and I told him what I saw. His face kinda goes white and he informs me that we have bodies on board the carrier to be buried at sea. He tells me there are the ashes of a girl, she wanted to be a mermaid so the family sent some ashes to be scattered, and the deputy's brother. The brother also had a naval career and would be in his dress whites. WTF, I think ghosts are 100% real now. So this isn't something that I actually saw, per se, but something that I felt. I was studying abroad in the fall of 2014, and it was the last night before I was supposed to fly home. I was sleeping in a dorm room of the college I was visiting, but had the bedroom to myself. I had a dream that there was an old man standing at the foot of my bed, and in the dream he walked around the bed as I lay in it and placed a hand on my shoulder. I immediately woke up in a cold sweat, absolutely terrified and panicky, with the urgent feeling that I absolutely had to leave the room. I grabbed my phone and went into the common room, noting that the exact time I had woken up was 3:13 a.m. I calmed myself down, and ended up falling asleep later on in the night. The next morning, as I'm eating breakfast with my classmates, I get an email from my dad that my grandfather, who was suffering from Alzheimer's, had passed away the previous night at 7:13 p.m. EDT. I quickly did the math in my head and realized that he had passed away the minute that I had woken from the dream that had scared the daylights out of me. I'm not sure if it was actually my grandfather saying goodbye to me before he left for good, but it's really the only thing that has ever happened to me that I don't have a scientific explanation for. At the very least it certainly makes for a good story. I wouldn't say creepy as in scary, but creepy in that it gave me goosebumps once I realized what had just happened. About 2.5 years ago, a very close friend of mine was murdered very violently. His death was violent and sudden, and left me deep in shock and grief. I'm still not over it. I'll call him Jules, it's close enough to his real name. A few months ago, I was home alone, and my husband was at work. It was pretty early in the afternoon, and I got tired and decided to lie down on the bed and take a nap. I took my glasses off, an important detail, put them on the nightstand, and drifted off. I woke up to hear our bedroom door opening, and although I was awake, I didn't open my eyes right away, but I remember thinking, oh, my husband must have come home from work, I must have slept a lot longer than I meant to. And then I felt the bed compress next to me as if someone was leaning on it. I felt 2 warm hands on both sides of my face, and a kiss on my forehead, so I smiled, opened my eyes, and looked up to see who I thought was my husband at first, leaning over me, with his hands still holding the sides of my face. Like I said, I'd taken my glasses off, and my vision is very bad without them, to the point where even if someone is just in front of me, their features will still be blurry, but it looked like my husband at first, as I looked up at him. Kind of a square face, dark blonde hair, and glasses. Even with my glasses off, I could tell he was smiling at me, and his hands were still caressing the sides of my face. I remember smiling back and saying hey you, but as I stared up at his face, I started realizing that certain features were just kind of off. The shape of his face was kind of different, his nose was too small, the glasses were different than my husband's glasses, and his hair was cut much shorter than my husband's and was a much darker shade of blonde. And the shirt he was wearing. My husband wouldn't wear anything like that. He doesn't even own a shirt like that. It was a black, tight-fitting t-shirt, almost like a muscle shirt. So, I squinted my eyes and lifted my head up a little closer. Once my vision sharpened a little, I realized it wasn't my husband. I recognized that face. It was Jules. Jules was leaning over me, with his hands still on my cheeks, and he was smiling down at me with this look of deep affection. I kind of gasped, and he smiled even wider, almost kind of like he was acknowledging that I'd finally realized who he was. Then he took his hands off my face, leaned back, and disappeared. He didn't fade out slowly like ghosts do in the movies, it was just like someone turned an image from a projector off. He was just gone as soon as he leaned away. I shot up from my bed, grabbed my glasses and put them on. Nobody was there. I looked at the clock, and it was only 2. My husband wasn't off work until 6. I ran around the house looking for him, just in case he'd come home from work early, and it was him that had kissed me. I was just trying to think of a rational explanation, like that maybe it was my husband, and in my sleepy state of just waking up, I'd only hallucinated that it was Jules. I searched every room. House was empty. I even called him at work, and he assured me he was there and wouldn't get off until 6, so, I just sat there kind of shaking, and I was covered in goosebumps. I wasn't scared, really. Just shaken up. But I was also emotional, and started crying. The way he'd kissed my forehead, touched my face, and smiled at me, was just so affectionate and loving. It was like he was trying to let me know he was still around and that he loved me. That he wasn't completely gone, so. I don't know. Maybe it was just my grieving brain hallucinating that I'd seen Jules because I'd been asleep and had just woken up. But God, the feeling of his hands on my cheeks, they were so warm and solid. The kiss on my forehead, I'd felt it. His mouth was warm on my skin. I'd felt his body heat. It was so real. Jules, if it really was you, man. Thank you. It still hurts, and I still think about you all the time. I'll always miss you. But thank you, and I love you, too. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. He touched me, and I felt him. I saw this bright white/red oval in the night sky. My knees grew weak and I could barely stand up. I pointed at it and tried to tell my mom that there was a UFO right there in front of us, but I was so scared I just mumbled, "Turns out it was a Budweiser blimp and I need glasses." I have 2. In the house I'm at now, everyone in my family claimed to have seen or sensed something, but I just shrugged it off to overactive imaginations. I don't necessarily disbelieve, but I didn't think there was actually anything in our house. I was in my bedroom at the time, and I opened my eyes in the middle of the night. I had woken up suddenly. However, to my horror, I saw a man on my bed. He was kneeling on all fours facing me, grinning mischievously like he knew he was freaking me out. I had never seen his face before, but he appeared to be blonde, but he was white and transparent at the same time, if that makes sense. I shut my eyes tight and didn't dare open again until the morning. I'm just glad I didn't have to pee. The second thing didn't really creep me out, but it was definitely paranormal. I was horseback riding, and going down the dirt road to the barn from the trails. The stable is in a historic area next to a battlefield in the American Civil War. It was early evening, dusk, and I stopped because I saw a small group of Civil War reenactors with their horses ahead crossing the road, only, on side they were riding was a wooden fence, and instead of jumping the fence, they were walking through the fence. That's when I realized they weren't reenactors. They didn't seem to notice, see, or hear me or my horse. I found out from some of the other boarders that other people often heard or saw things in the area as well, and there were spots on certain trails that horses would refuse to go near. When I was a kid I'd sneak out and walk my dog and sometimes go all the way to the canal path in the woods that was turned into a biking/walking trail. She would occasionally stop and refuse to go one single step more, and 12-year-old me always got freaked out about something like ghosts, but now that I'm older I realize she probably didn't want to get eaten by coyotes. I have chronic night terrors. They all started when I was like 17, and I remember the first one vividly. I was fast asleep, and I opened my eyes to an old woman staring into my face with the most furious look on her face. I've never dreamt such a realistic face. And I did not know this person. She was just an old lady looking like she wanted to strangle me. I screamed and kicked her, and she ran into my closet. I screamed and ran into my dad's office, screaming that someone was in my room. I was genuinely terrified, and so was he. And then I was like, wait. I don't think I was awake. What's happening? And I just walked off trembling and went back to sleep. Every night, for months after, I had another night terror of someone else staring at me, crouched over me as I slept. It finally ended when I screamed into the person's face, "Leave me alone." Now they only happen every few months. I'm in my 20s now. My husband hates it when I have them, but they've never been like that since. I can't explain it, but I swear that old woman was very real, and very angry. I've had so many paranormal things happen around me that at this point, it's so normal and doesn't bother me anymore, but during the beginning I was terrified. I remember this house I used to live in had a ridiculous amount of activity in it. I was home alone one day when I was about 11 and I was chilling on my bed with my cat while messing around on my iPod. The way my bed was set up meant that my back was toward the bedroom door, which I always kept closed. I remember feeling a very sudden sense of someone watching me, and I turned to look at the door and saw the knob turn and the door slowly swung open by about a foot. I couldn't see anything through the darkness of the hallway, but sure enough, I could hear a faint whisper, and it was whispering my name, over and over again. Instantly my cat went nuts. He was positioning himself between me and the door, full attention, and ready to pounce on something. But as soon as the whispering started, it stopped, and the feeling of someone watching me disappeared. The only thing that kept me from thinking I was nuts was the fact that my cat heard it too. I really think whatever was calling to me didn't like the fact that my cat was there protecting me. When I was a teenager, I began noticing strange things in my house, like cupboard doors open while no one else was home, sinks running, etc. Whatever, I brushed it off. But then one evening when I was home alone, I grabbed a cookie from our cookie jar. It was a glass jar with a metal lid on the front, with no sort of airtight seal. The lid just gently sat on the jar. Anyways, I put the lid back onto the jar, and was standing at the counter maybe 4 feet away. The cookie jar started rattling, and as I glanced over at it, the lid shot off and hit me, hard. I ran screaming. No scientific explanation for how that could have happened. When I was in kindergarten, we moved into an old house. My baby sister and I had the upstairs, and my parents' bedroom was at the foot of the stairs. Mom usually kept the baby with her downstairs, and I'd play for hours upstairs with my new imaginary friend. Mom was never creeped out by this, she was just happy I was content by myself. One night my stepdad hears something upstairs and notices the light is on. He sees me standing at the top of the stairs in a nightgown, so he goes up to see what's wrong. He slips and falls on his way up, breaking 3 toes in the process. My mom asked him what he was doing while she helped him tape up his foot. Going to see why Casey had the light on and was awake at 2 a.m. was his answer. My baby sister woke up from all the commotion and Mom went upstairs to get her and turned the light off on the way down. Then she woke up all the way and realized I was at my dad's, 700 miles away, and that my baby sister won't go to sleep with the light on, so she knows it was off when they went to bed. Also, I hated nightgowns and dresses and refused to wear anything with a skirt at that age. We're fairly convinced he saw my imaginary friend/ghost roommate. Mom asked me about her when I was in high school and told me this story, and up until that point, I hadn't realized she wasn't real. I've not seen her again. We moved out of that house, but our family still owns it, but definitely felt her presence when I stole the key in high school and was using the house to be alone with my boyfriend. I got to. On Halloween night, driving along a river in town, super foggy. Something ran across the road in front of us. I could only see the bottom half and it looked like human legs running but backwards like an ostrich. Really weird. Friends we say, and it was some urban legend called the Donkey Lady. Other one was when I was hanging out with my friend late at night like 2 a.m. We were just playing video games and talking shit. One of the things we talked about was La Chuza, which is another urban legend of a demonic owl witch that swoops down and takes you away to be eaten after you whistle 3 times in the dark. Anyway, I had to go outside later to get something from my car and my friend decided to prank me. He waited until I was at my car, about 30 feet from the front door, and from the front door he whistled, knowing it would freak me out. He whistled a second time. Then a third. At the exact moment he ended the third whistle, an utterly terrifying, loud screech, imagine a car burning out really loud, happened right above me. I, so scared, looked at my friend hoping that he made that noise, but his face was like he saw a ghost. I ran as fast as I possibly could back inside and he was freaking out as much as me. We ended up doing some research and it most likely was a barn owl that heard a whistle and thought it was a mouse or a rodent. But what freaked me out was that our experience was exactly in line of what the urban legend is. Aside from being killed lol, and also that we were joking about that urban legend like 30 minutes prior. A stuffed dragon I had as a kid fell off the bed in the middle of the night. I woke up to see it crawling across the floor. Continuous haunting events have been prevalent since then over the past 13 years. I'm fairly sure this house I used to live in was haunted. I'm a night owl, so I stay up really late. Well, I guess someone didn't like that because every night at 3 a.m., no matter where I was, a little girl would let out a blood-curdling scream always directly behind me. The thing is, she only screamed if I was awake. I've never awoken to her scream. My bedroom is down a kinda long hallway with a bathroom in the middle, and my bedroom door has always had a very secure latch. Well, one day I had the door closed and I heard my cat scratching to come in. I got up to let him in, but he wasn't there. I checked the hallway and the bathroom, but he was asleep on the couch. So I closed my door again and sat on my bed. Well, I hear the scratching again, and before I could go check, the doorknob turned and the door popped open a bit. I freaked the hell out and slammed the door shut again. But I could still hear scratching. If anyone could explain who/what these might be, please let me know. There was a period in my life where I saw a bunch of supernatural occurrences at this creepy ass house I lived in as a kid. As far as I know, there wasn't anything haunted about the house. We met the owner/builder. He built the house a few years prior, so, as far as we knew, there wasn't any history to it. During our time there we lost a lot of pets to weird circumstances. The cat I had since I was a child was found dead and splayed out on a planter. We presumed she fell out the tree that was in the planter. We had 2 dogs that eventually had puppies. Of course there were the stillborn pups. We gave away most of the animals but kept the father and 2 of his sons. The runt was found flattened on the street and the other son died from overeating. Later we got a new dog to be the other dog's companion. Our neighbors at the time abused their pet goats. Eventually they lied and said that our new dog killed a few of their goats. Their proof was a completely tanned hide of a goat. They blackmailed my parents by saying we either had to pay for new goats or put our dog to sleep. My parents decided to put our dog to sleep instead. Our last dog ran away and we never saw him again. Years before, we had an old dog since before I was born. On the day before I left to go visit some family out of state, he nearly bit my mom, which had never happened before. We later found out he had maggots growing in his body from sustained wounds from this plant that naturally grew in our backyard. He was put to sleep before I got back. The supernatural parts were various figures I used to see. Our backyard was pretty large, almost an acre. On the land there was a guest house my dad used as his personal study. One night I was forced to take some compost into the backyard. I saw a figure standing and seemingly watching me from a few feet away. About a month or so before a friend of my grandparents died. The reason I say this is because, for whatever reason, I knew the figure was this person. I felt it inside me like a second sense. Being a kid, I ran away in fear. I never saw the figure again. Some years later I was alone in the house. In the living room I could hear the house settling. It creaked and cracked. The house itself was made to be unnaturally long. 5 bedrooms, but instead of 2 stories it was stretched out over the property. The living room had an immediate view of the long hallway that acted like a spine for the house. I felt a presence just creeping in the darkened hallway. It felt like it rested in the shadows just slightly away from my view. Another night I was all alone. I went to the kitchen to get a snack and then back to my room in the hallway. I stopped once I was at the start of the hallway, feeling something at the opposite end. I ignored it and continued forward. As I was just a few feet away from my room I saw a hulking figure rushing towards me. My instincts kicked in as I rushed into my room within seconds and shut the door. I stared at my door for a few minutes waiting for what would happen next, but nothing happened. As soon as my heart rate went down I didn't feel the presence anymore. It was completely quiet for the rest of the night. I live in a house where an older practical joker passed away. Sometimes, not often. Doors, windows will open and close. Chairs will be rearranged. Cabinet doors will be opened or closed. I just tell him to knock it off. Never been malicious or anything. But it can be weird. And where you might suggest it's the wind. These are often sliding doors, sliding windows, dead-bolted doors. So nope. When I was younger, I had this night light that was shaped like a frog. It terrified me. I used to have nightmares where its eyes would bob up and down, then it would sort of contort and turn into some sort of monster. As a kid, It terrified me so much I used to build a literal wall of pillows on my bed to segregate me from that demonic frog. What's more is that the thing would sometimes appear in different parts of my room when no one was home, and it would routinely turn off and on regardless of the time of day, and sometimes even when it was unplugged or off. Then, when I was about 7, my parents replaced it with a different night light, and just like that, everything stopped. The nightmares, the cold feelings, the fear all just seemed to disappear. I still think it's out there, plotting to invade my dreams once more. When I was young, my family and I moved into a 3-story colonial home that sat on top of a hill and overlooked 17 acres. One day we were rummaging through some of the stuff they left behind in the basement and we stumbled upon a crate filled with dark magic and tarot cards. My dad instantly took the crate, made a fire, and burned it on the property, but it was super odd because the smoke that came from it was not only huge in size but pitch black. Most items that are burnt don't produce smoke like that. Especially from a pile of cards. It was just super strange. And we used to hear things go up and down the stairs occasionally. It was a really pretty, yet creepy house. 3 weeks ago I was over at my mom's house, dropping off my kids for the weekend. I was sitting on her couch and looked down the hallway and I said there was a spirit there. My son says I'm lying, but I keep going on. I say I can see a figure there. It's a woman. It's thick in the air. I don't even know why I was saying all this because my kids are young, I'm atheist, and I don't believe in ghosts, plus this could scare them. A few minutes later my mom tells me that I might want to go say goodbye to Grandma while I'm in town. She might pass soon. I immediately get up and leave, angry that my mom hadn't told me sooner, as I'd been at her house for 30 minutes. Grandma is 5 minutes or less from my mom's house. I walk in and they are closing her eyes. Later it hits me. All that spirit stuff. It was my grandma, on her way out. My grandmother's house is haunted by my grandfather's ghost. He used to smoke a pipe or a cigar. After he died, my grandmother stopped sleeping in their bedroom because she claimed he visited her at night. We never saw anything, but, from time to time, people who slept in that room told of smelling cigar smoke during the night. It became a bit of a joke that Grandpa was visiting again. Some 40 years later, after Grandma died, her niece bought the house from the estate. She complained that she thought her sons were lying to her when she accused them of smoking in the house, and they denied it. She swore she was smelling cigar smoke, and they vehemently denied that they smoked. My sister asked her, "Where have you been for the last 40 years? Everyone knows that the house is haunted, and that's Grandpa's cigar smoke." She hadn't smelled it before, and thought everyone had been joking all those years. And, yes, to this day, Grandpa is still smoking. Back when I was a wee lad and still being put down for naps, there was always a shadow person in my room. Every time, as soon as my mom left, he would pop up at the end of my bed, do a little bounce, and just stare at me with no face. In fact, he had no discernible features. He was but an opaque shadow. Yet I could feel him looking at me. At first, I would call for my mom, but she would never hear. As time went on I grew accepting of his existence, but I was never comfortable. Eventually I grew out of scheduled naps and I haven't seen him since, but I know he's still there. Vape might as well. Gather round kids, this is the story of the haunted state park. A couple years ago I was living in Chicago and my friend came to visit because I was throwing a Halloween party. It's the night before Halloween and we decide to go skateboarding. Well, my friend can skate, I can do ollies and smoke pot. Anywho, we make our way to Wilson Skate Park, name drop for any locals, and there's nobody there. We're there for about 2 hours and nobody else ever goes in there. As we were leaving I take a couple pictures of the place because the lighting looked cool and I sent a Snapchat video to my girlfriend and my friend who I was with. He looks at it afterwards and said I don't remember anybody else being there. We head back to my place and I look at the snap on my girlfriend's phone. There's 4 people in the background chilling. I look at the pictures on my phone and there's 4 people there that were not there. I was alone in my house while my parents were having dinner at the neighbors. I was about 12. It was the middle of summer, so the front door of the house was open with a screen door. As with most screen doors, it had a tension spring to auto-close it, and it had an unmistakable sound when it closed given that it would get to the last inch, and then loudly slam shut as the spring released it. So I'm in the kitchen, where I can't see the door, and I hear the door clearly slam shut. I figured one of my parents came home for something so I didn't pay much attention. A few minutes later I start to get really confused because I hear a door shut again. Upstairs this time, where my sister and my own bedrooms are located. I cautiously climb the stairs, no sign of anyone, except my sister's closet door is closed, which was unusual, and the light in the closet was on, could see it on under the door. At this point I was really freaked out. I crept back to my own room next door, got a bat and silently sat listening for about an hour. Not a sound. I eventually got up the courage to go back in the room and throw open the door, and there was nothing there. Although, my sister's room did have an access panel to our attic, which I was then convinced someone was in the attic. I shut the door to the closet, and my sister's room and cowered downstairs until my parents got home. Never heard either of those doors open the rest of the night, and never did figure out what truly happened. Definitely the time I watched a shadow person walk into my roommate's room. I had seen it numerous times before out of the corner of my eye, and I always dismissed it. This time I had my new dog. Only had him 4 days and the pup never made a peep the whole time we had him. All of a sudden the dog jumps and barks at my bedroom door, and I watched about a 6-foot-tall shadow figure walk past my doorway into my roommate's room. The dog went fucking berserk. That's how I knew what I was seeing was real. My roommate always had horrendous nightmares when he lived in this apartment, never before, never after. I always suspected this entity had something to do with it. During the summer of 2014 I got a job working at my college in the maintenance department. I got to work alongside tradesmen and learn some really neat skills. Specifically I worked under the HVAC tradesman. A co-worker of mine and I were tasked with going through the empty dorm rooms and checking each and every air conditioning unit and making notes of what had to be fixed. The two of us decide to take a 15-minute break in one of the dorm rooms. Just sit at the desk, eat a snack, and shoot the shit. As we're talking, we hear a door close at the opposite end of the hallway, the end with no entrance or exit. We assume that a coworker of ours was wandering the building looking for us. It's important to note that we're situated directly next to the main entrance of the wing. No one could have come in or left without us seeing them. We investigate the noise and find no trace anyone was there. The staircases on this end of the hall were fire escapes and rigged with alarms if they opened. Every single dorm was not only empty, but locked as well. Using our master key we check a few rooms to make sure no one is messing with us. We return to our break and deduce that the noise we heard was pipes or perhaps someone slammed a car door outside. As we continue talking, I begin to hear footsteps walking towards the room we were in coming from the opposite end of the hallway where we heard the door close. I can still remember how heavy they sounded. They didn't sound angry, but they sounded deliberately loud, like they wanted to be noticed. Ultimately I thought I was imagining them and ignored what I was hearing. About an hour later we finish our job and head back out to our work vehicle. As we get in the car, my coworker turns to me and asks, "Hey, nameless_13th, did you happen to hear footsteps in the hallway when we got back to the room?" I told them I indeed heard them, but I didn't want to acknowledge them cause I didn't want to sound like a nutcase. I'm not outright claiming something paranormal occurred, but my co-worker and I were the only two people who had access to that building at the time, and to this day we cannot decide on a likely explanation. So I'm pretty sure my current home was haunted. When I was a kid I used to hear a baby cry in my house and I would see a man in a black cloak. Nothing crazy ever happened to me but I was always freaked out. When I was in middle school, I had to wake up before my family to get ready for band practice and I would always hear footsteps and see the front and back door doorknobs turning as if someone was trying to break in. I would look out the window and wouldn't see anyone standing at the doors. No one in my family believed me and after a while the activity stopped so I ignored it. Then in high school things started to get worse. When I was home alone I would hear screams, the TV would turn on and off by itself, and things would fall off tables/countertops. I would also have dreams of the man in the black cloak and he would just stand in the corner of my room and look at me. Every time I had the dream he would creep closer to my bed. The last time I had the dream he ended up at the side of my bed and started to choke me. I woke up in a cold sweat crying. My parents thought it was stress so they just recommend relaxation techniques. A few weeks passed by and nothing happened so I started believing it was stress. But then one day my parents woke up in the middle of the night to find me staring at them from the foot of their bed. They called to me and I wouldn't respond. They tried to get a reaction and nothing. Then suddenly I reached for my throat and started gasping for air. My face started to turn blue and my parents couldn't do anything to help me. They were about to call 911 when all of a sudden I stopped, turned around and went back to my room. My parents were in shock. They waited a minute or two and then walked into my room to find me sound asleep. They asked me about the incident the following morning and I was oblivious to what had occurred. They were spooked and finally believed something paranormal was going on. They went to our local church and got a priest to bless the house soon after that. I haven't had an incident at the house since, but I still see/hear things while I'm out and about. Was living in the basement of my mom's house, which had my room, a bathroom, a room with a TV and 2 futons, a laundry room, and a storage room, when I was 18. Doors would open and close by themselves, noises would come from other rooms, the usual little stuff. Friends stopped wanting to come over to spend the night because the vibe downstairs made them uncomfortable. I dealt with it, thinking that if there really was something living down here with me, just peacefully coexist with it and don't give it attention. It was fine for a few months. Then, one day something flew off of a shelf in the TV room while I was watching Netflix. I immediately ran out of the room and upstairs and hung out up there for the rest of the day. No one believed me, naturally. Stuff of mine started to go missing too, which was annoying. Fast forward a week after the thing flying off the shelf, and I fall asleep while binge watching anime on the TV in that same room. I had the TV set on a timer so that it would turn off around 2 a.m., just in case I passed out before turning it off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I wake up to the sound of the door to the room opening, and footsteps walking in. The TV had automatically shut off by now, so I could hear everything clearly. The footsteps make their way into the room and I feel something standing over my bed. I hear it breathing. I couldn't move, my head was under the covers, and held my breath. It stood over me for what felt like forever, but it was probably only like 3 minutes. Then I heard the footsteps walking out, and the door shut. I ran out of the room once I felt the coast was clear, and upstairs into my mom's room. I woke her up, told her what happened, and asked her if I could sleep in her bed the rest of the night. She said yes, then I fell asleep. Until I woke up, back in the room in the basement, right where I had started. I had just imagined going upstairs, I guess. I thought that entire thing was just a dream, until I heard the door open again, and the footsteps again, heading towards my bed. I ducked under my covers again, and I felt it stand over me for a little while, before hearing it leave. I tried going upstairs again, or at least I thought. But the same thing happened. I fell asleep upstairs in my mom's room, and woke up back in the TV room downstairs. This loop happened again and again, until finally, I woke up and it was daylight. Was that sleep paralysis? I have no clue. I have never experienced sleep paralysis before, and I've never had an experience like that night since. After that night, I started spending the night at my boyfriend's house. Eventually, my mom sold the house. We were looking at houses to buy, and there was one house that we were really interested in. The first time we went, my husband and I both got a really uneasy feeling in one of the upstairs bedrooms, but we didn't mention it until later. Since the house was so perfect and reasonably priced, and because we secretly wanted to see if we had the same feeling again, we decided to go back a second time. That time we brought his parents and did not mention the creepy room. Everybody loved the house, but the minute my mother-in-law set foot in that room she backed out of it, wide-eyed, and said, "Oh no. No. There's spirit in that room." We tried to provide a rational explanation, but she was dead set on there being a spirit, so much that she went outside to wait for us. While she was outside, I took my camera back upstairs by myself. Upon entering the room I said, "If you're actually here, please show yourself in this photo." I deliberately left the flash off so there wouldn't be any dust orbs, but instead I got a real orb right in front of my eyes. In retrospect, I'm assuming it was just one baseball-sized orb of light moving really fast in a circle and flickering like a strobe light, but it looked like it was several. It disappeared as soon as I took the photo. As quickly as I could I said, "Okay, thank you. Now for proof, I need you not to be in this photo." And there was nothing. And then I ran down the stairs, passing my husband at the doorway and whispering, "We are not buying this house." One of my hamsters died. The next night I heard his wheel, which squeaks when he's running in it and sounds different than the other wheels, so I knew it was his. Didn't bother to turn on the lights to see what was going on, so I'll assume he just came to say goodbye. Once, while at the beach, me and some friends decided to take the boat out on the creek and head to the ocean. While out there, we saw one of our friends, his girlfriend, and his brothers on the boat. We told him we didn't know he was at the beach and invited them to eat dinner/have drinks at our house that night. A couple hours later, while sitting around, I called him and asked if they were coming. He said he'd love to if he didn't have to work that day. Confused, I asked if he had headed back home from the beach, a 3-hour drive. He told me no, he hadn't been at the beach at all. I called some other friends I knew worked with him thinking he was messing with me, but they all said he'd been there all day. Never figured it out, and all of us are freaked out by it. I was a freshman in college and living in the dorms. It was probably about midnight and I was finally getting to bed. I had all of the lights turned off, but where my dorm was located, there was always light outside our window. It was at this time that I saw something black ooze around in the corner of the room, near the window. It spread out like a dense black blanket and hovered over me with a screaming face. It started to get closer to me and I was paralyzed in fear. Right before it got close enough to touch me, my phone rang. I was able to bolt upright and flip on the light while answering the phone. It was my sister asking me in a worried tone if I was okay. I guess one of her friends told her that she had to call me immediately. She kept putting off saying that I would be asleep or something, but her friend was persistent. It was honestly one of the scariest moments of my life. 2 paranormal experiences. First was when I was awoken by a sock hitting me in the head. I was home alone and sick, and my socks were in the corner. Literally, I was the only one home. A sock just flew through the air and hit me in the head. Needless to say, I didn't sleep much after that. I walked downstairs and saw the blankets all puffed up. They were shaped in a way that vaguely resembled a person curled up. I was again home alone, so naturally very confused. As I approached the blanket, it collapsed. It went flat. There was nothing under the blanket. I audibly shouted "what" and promptly walked out the front door. Still live in the house. Those are all the paranormal stories I have. I usually turn on all the lights at night. If it gets too dark, I feel really scared and sometimes hear things like whispers and footsteps. I've caught glimpses of my deceased grandparents, great-grandparents and a few past family and friends. They stand by watching for a brief moment and then disappear in a blink. Other times, an otherwise wild animal like a sparrow will come strangely close to me and I will feel a certain person's presence. I told my mother once, when I was a little kid, but I did not like it when she told my aunts. Too much attention and it made me feel awkward. So I stopped mentioning it. I am an adult now and keep any sightings to myself. The way I see it, if my deceased relatives and friends want to visit, it's not because they want me to spread the news. I never told my husband what I saw, mainly because of the dream he had. So we had our bed in the corner of the room and we had our feet toward where the headboard is at and our heads at the very edge of the bed. We were both laying down facing up. He was quietly napping and I was scrolling through Facebook reading something when I had an urge to put the phone down and look to the side. And I saw the outline of a friend's face who had passed away 3 years earlier. I felt comfort knowing he was there, and by outline I mean, you know how when you stare at something long enough and you look away you see the outline everywhere you look. Well, something like that, except his face stayed in one place. It was like he was standing above both of us. And a few seconds later my husband woke up freaked out and gasping for air. He said he dreamt he was there asleep next to me when all of a sudden an angel with huge white wings that filled the room grabbed him and pinned him down to the bed and told him, "You are here because I am holding you here." He said the angel was standing above him, pinning him down by his shoulders. That friend was super protective of me while living. I just know he still takes care of me even now. Not really paranormal, but a sleep paralysis thing. I was about 9 years old, and I woke up from a really bad nightmare. And at the foot of my bed I saw a clown. I nearly shit my pants, but it disappeared after like 2 seconds, and I could hardly sleep for weeks. Kinda tame compared to other stuff here, but it traumatized me as a child. When I was younger and still in high school, I would have my buddies come over all the time. We always took long nighttime walks on the golf course and shoot the shit. We probably thought we were being really deep, but I'm sure it's normal high school stuff. Location: I lived next to a golf course stuff where my main road ran alongside it and we would hop on the trail. This is important. We always headed up 3 stop signs and then took a left to get on the trail. So, we start out this night late fall and headed up the street like normal. When we reached the first stop sign, Brian turned around to walk backward and noticed a dog following us. We shooed it away and continued on. We made it to the next stop and lo and behold, the dog is back and sitting. It's eerily quiet and I don't like the situation at all and continue on. At the next stop again, we encountered this dog. Except, it at the time seemed more like a silhouette than anything. When we turned around it was sitting and then it opened its mouth. Nothing came out. No cold breath, no noise, and no teeth. Pure black. It reminded me of a dog with no lower jaw, but still not right. We all took off running into the course and never looked back. I've had several experiences, but my first one sticks out the most. I was about 15 and had gone to the movies with my dad. Had to use the restroom about halfway through, so I went upstairs, which is where they were. I was about finished when I heard the door to the bathroom open, then shut, and then a woman crying. She went in the stall next to me and she was pretty loud. Washed my hands, but something told me to check on the woman. I knocked on the stall door and asked if she needed anything. No response. Asked again if she needed anything or for me to get someone for her. Again, no response, but she was still sobbing. Knocked on the stall door again. But this time, it opened. Looked inside, but no one was in there, yet I could still hear crying. Have never exited a room so fast in my life. My parents moved out of the home I grew up in and into an older, but rather nice country house about 4 years ago. The elderly woman who had lived there alone had recently died, opening it up for them to purchase. I was in college at the time and went to visit during Thanksgiving. The house was beautiful during the day but always unsettled me at night, though I largely attributed this to my tendency to get creeped out easily rather than anything supernatural. I'm a pretty harsh skeptic. Still, nights in the guest bedroom proved sleepless and I often laid awake in bed after hearing a strange noise or feeling an odd sensation, usually just as I was drifting off to sleep. One night, fed up with my overactive imagination keeping me awake, I grabbed my blanket and went into my parents' room, shutting the door behind me and bundling myself up on the floor next to their bed. It must have been around midnight. As I was finally starting to nod, there was suddenly a crystal clear, abrupt knock on the door, jolting me suddenly awake. My mom stirred in the bed and after a few seconds, called sleepily, "Come in," probably assuming it was me. To my complete and utter shock, and horror, the door responded by pushing itself open, about 4 feet open. I was frozen. "Mom," I said finally, "I'm right here." For some bizarre reason, which in retrospect I'm guessing was my mom spewing off whatever ghost knowledge she could easily access in her semi-delirious state, Mom mumbled, "You're not supposed to invite it in." By this point Mom, stepdad, and I were all wide awake. Nothing else happened after that point, but it's something I still wonder about. The next morning I messed with the door and looked around for possible sources of airflow but all the windows had been shut. We also had only one pet cat at the time, which had been sleeping on the bed with my parents. I have absolutely no idea if it was paranormal. I'm inclined to say it wasn't because, like I said, I'm a skeptic. But, Jesus. That timing is a hard thing to try and explain away. My girlfriend and I live in an old house built in 1860 and have experienced a variety of different strange things happen in our bathroom. One night as we're watching a movie we hear a rattling. The bathroom door was violently shaking, almost of the hinge and remained shaking for 2 minutes straight. After staring at it, it suddenly stopped and the bathroom was perfectly normal. I investigated the bathroom door to see what was causing the shaking and the only way I could replicate the noise was by punching the door from inside the bathroom very fast. One of the strangest things I've ever seen in my life. When I was young I had a packet of crisps on the side in my bedroom. I turned to face them and they flew off the top and straight past my head. Not sure if it was a dream but it seemed real. Playing manhunt with my friends. See my friend hiding behind a tree. I call his name and say I found you, then turn around and see him getting out from under the deck. I look back at the tree and the hooded figure I saw, my friend was wearing a hoodie, was gone. I then find out 59 or so years ago someone committed suicide in his shed. I honestly wish I was making this up. When I was 16-ish, I was in a world market with my grandmother, mom, and sisters. I branched off on my own and was looking at the toiletries when I heard a man clear his throat next to me. I glanced up at him and I don't know how to explain how I felt. I almost wet my pants from terror. His eyes were aqua almost to the point of glowing and his pupils were elongated. He smiled at me and his teeth were somewhat pointed and dirty. He was wearing a gray suit with a black tie and he was so tall and thin with a perfectly trimmed crew cut. I turned and left the aisle to find my family. I told my mom and grandmother about him and they saw the same glowing eyes that I saw. We were terrified. We saw him again a few minutes later at the registers and his eyes were brown and his teeth were straight and white as he grinned at the cashier. My mom's twin sister was dying of cancer. One morning, before anybody was awake, my mom wakes up to see her sister next to her bed. Her sister smiles and tells her, "Don't worry, it's okay, I'm here to say goodbye." Before my mom could answer, she wakes up from her dream. She must have said something or moved because my dad woke up and asked what happened. She told him my aunt had died but he brushed it off and told her to sleep. Not even 5 minutes later the phone rings, and the nurse lets my mom know that my aunt just died. Things get lost around me often in ways that don't make sense. By that I mean you can drop a quarter in the middle of an empty room and if you aren't looking right at it as it falls it becomes impossible to find. It even happens with larger objects. I lost a hairbrush once when I knocked it off the bathroom counter. I looked everywhere inside the bathroom and in the hall it connected to and never found the brush. This is relevant to the story. One time when I was a teenager my mom dropped her keys as she was coming into the house after work. I had already gotten home and was sitting in the living room watching TV but I heard the clink of them hit the floor and my mom say crap so she definitely dropped them. I wasn't paying that much attention until she called my name. She had a worried look on her face and asked me to help look for her keys. We looked all over the tile in front of the door first, then we looked on the table beside the door and in the little cat pot where we'd usually put keys or things we didn't want to lose. There were no keys in the pot. Remember this. I even lifted up the pot and checked underneath it. I turned it over, so once we exhausted the area of search by the door, we spread out. I dug through the hall closet. My mom went into the living room looking to see if they bounced in there. When we didn't find the keys in those likely places we started turning the house upside down. We moved the couch, emptied trash bins, looked through all the drawers. I got a flashlight and looked behind bookcases and into the very corners of the room. My mom emptied her pockets and purse even though we both knew we heard the keys hit the tile. We could not find these keys and were starting to get real worried. The keyring contained the house keys, her car keys, keys to our shed and a spare key to my grandmother's house. They were all brass or copper in color so they should have stood out against the green tile and light blue carpet but no luck. Eventually my mom decided they had somehow fallen out of her pocket outside, even though she would have had to have them to unlock the door. So she took the flashlight and started tracing her steps from the front door to the driveway, sweeping the flashlight side to side trying to catch the shine of them. I was alone in the house. Now by then I knew whatever force that made objects disappear had taken these keys. My mom probably had been hanging up her coat when she dropped them so she didn't see them fall and the thing had grabbed them. So I sat down on the couch and said out loud to an empty house, "Okay, funny stuff, but I'd really like it if you gave those keys back please." Of course nothing happened. Then I said, "I'll close my eyes, please just give me the keys back," and I shut my eyes. A second later I heard a soft clink from the front door. I opened my eyes and walked over. There were the keys in the little cat pot. For some reason I got really scared then and I grabbed the keys and ran out to my mom. I told her where I found them without mentioning I had asked for them back and she was really relieved. She said we must have overlooked them, but we couldn't have. I turned the pot over at least 10 minutes before. They weren't there and then they were. I don't ask for stuff back anymore. Now a lot of the time stuff shows up in a place I couldn't have overlooked. I'm glad things are being returned but still, it scares me a little. This isn't necessarily paranormal. But it's definitely something that made me believe that there might be something else up there. My friends and I were fishing in the wee hours of the morning. Not at some pond or lake but at the beach, fishing into the ocean. We had little luck and caught nothing but small catfish which didn't put up much of a fight because of how young they were. One of my friend John insisted on keeping them in the water tank nonetheless. We also made an extra line using just a roll of fishing line and attaching a hook onto it and casting it as far as possible, letting the tide carry the line out. It was pretty pricey cloth fishing line. We were still students back then. Here's the paranormal part. When the sun started to poke through the horizon, we decided to call it a day and head back home. For those that don't know, catfish have pretty solid heads. As in its head is literally very hard. John decided to take one out of the tank and literally started bashing its head with pliers, remarking how hard it is and suggesting that we try it too. It came to a point where he was gripping its tail with the pliers and smashing it on the ground. Think of the Hulk smashing Loki in the first Avengers movie. I knew he would move on to the others when the one with him eventually dies. I quickly carried the water tank to the edge of the rocks before overturning it and releasing the remaining catfish back into the sea. While packing up, someone accidentally kicked the roll of cloth fishing line off the edge of the rocks and into the sea. It wasn't coiled up yet. We saw the plastic roll slowly sink and drift out into the ocean. It belonged to John and he was pissed as hell and started throwing a tantrum. Wanting to resolve the situation, I took my fishing rod out again and tried casting my hook into the sea, hoping to hook into it while the others packed up their own stuff. John continued to kick up a fuss and told us that we needed to pay him the cost of the line. I kept at it, but all I reeled back in was seaweed up until the point everyone was fully packed and ready to go. I told them I'll try one last time. I looked up into the skies and prayed something along the lines of, please, if there's anything up there, or if the baby catfishes that I saved from torment can hear my prayer, help me out this once. I casted the line. I hooked onto something. My first thought was seaweed again. Until I was reeling halfway and it felt different. When it was close enough, I saw that I hooked onto the cloth line. One single fishing line. In the sea. Everyone was amazed. I was freaking out. My one and only encounter with something paranormal. When I was a teenager, my friends and I had a bad experience with an Ouija board when we were about 13. Two of my friends were upstairs standing on a deck with an Ouija board trying to contact spirits, while another friend and I were downstairs in a bedroom also using an Ouija board. It wasn't working for my friends upstairs, but the planchette was moving for my friend and I. The spirit was answering questions and stuff. Well, I don't know what got into our heads, but we started taunting the spirit, telling it that it was weak and needed us to move the planchette. I don't remember what made us start talking like that, but we took our hands off the planchette. All at once the planchette moved on its own off the board, the bedroom door burst open, there was a big rushing like wind that went past us, the Venetian blinds above the bed started jumping up and down and it looked like something heavy and large was standing on the bed. Well, of course my friend and I screamed and tried to run out of the room, but it felt like we were running through molasses. As soon as we passed the threshold of the door everything felt normal and we bolted upstairs to where our friends were. We were screaming our heads off. But our friends didn't believe us that had happened. They thought we had made the whole thing up to mess with them. Anyway, needless to say, that was the last time my friend and I ever played with an Ouija board. I'm still friends with these girls to this day and they remember it happening. Well, my one friend remembered it happening. The other two remember us screaming and freaking out. From when I was a baby until 7 years old, my mom and I lived in the first floor of an old yellow house in a neighborhood next to the city. The house was designed so that the living room and the kitchen were connected via a long hallway with the dining room off to the side in the middle of the hallway. I was about 3 or 4 at the time and a tiny kid, so I had a booster chair when I sat at the dining room table. One seat at the head of the table was almost in the hallway, and whenever my mom tried to put my chair in that seat, I'd pick it up and move it. Eventually, the seat moving got to the point where she asked, "Op, why do you keep moving the seat?" I told her it was because of the man in the hallway. At least, that's what she told me, I said. She asked me what he looked like and I gave her a pretty detailed description. She didn't really dismiss it, but I was about 4, so kids say a lot of weird things. From my own memory, I remember the hallway. And I remember the man. He wore a yellow raincoat and rain hat and black fishing boots. He looked like the stereotypical Cape Cod fisherman. Whenever I walked down that hallway, he would follow me. I would never see him directly, but he was in my peripherals and I could make out what he looked like. So for years I always ran down the hallway because I was afraid of what would happen if he caught up to me. He was always gone when I made it to the end. We ended up moving out when I was 7 to a different part of the city. So you thought this was over? Oh hell no, this is where it gets weird. So my mom is back at our old neighborhood and she ends up chatting with the neighbors a bit. These people are in their 50s or 60s at the time and they've been in the neighborhood for decades. The subject got around to our old house and the neighbors told my mom that it was the oldest on the block, built in the early 20s. They said they had known the man before us, a reserved and grumpy old fisherman who would walk down to the nearby bay in a yellow rain jacket, yellow hat and black boots. I grew up in an old house in the Chicago suburbs and experienced so much stuff as a little kid until I was a teenager. When we tore it down to rebuild a new house, there were newspapers stuffed in the attic for insulation from 1940s saying the US won World War II. When I was about 4 or 5 I couldn't sleep. I always seemed to sleep with my face towards the wall because my room was scary. I decided to roll over and I opened my eyes. What I saw still chills me to the bone. I saw a full apparition of an older lady floating out of my closet. She had red eyes, and was wearing a long dress that looked very old. She was luminescent, semi-transparent, and white in color and floated right towards my bed, about 5 feet away. I jumped out of my bed in fear and fell on the floor towards the door. I have never been so frightened in my life. I was literally frozen in place and in shock as this figure slowly moved towards me, staring at me the whole time. I would try to get up and run, but I was frozen in place and could almost feel my soul get up and run, but not my body. I finally got up and ran to the door. I gave one last look in my room and she was still moving towards me with her head/eyes following me. I noped out of there real quick. I ran to my dad in the front room, but he dismissed it as imagination. But I will tell you, my imagination has never scared me so bad where I was completely frozen in fear. I will remember it forever. My sisters have creepier stories: babies crying at night, 3-finger scratch marks on doors, someone screaming their name into their ear while sleeping, other apparitions of old men, black figures, unexplained noises, screaming, and more. I don't believe in God or the afterlife really, but I sure as hell believe in ghosts, which is contradicting, I know. Not creepy per se, but still not really explainable. I was in 7th grade and was really worried about my grandfather on my mom's side, who I was insanely close to because he was in the hospital and not doing well after falling and breaking his hip. About a week after his fall, I have a dream which is very unusual in itself because I never remember my dreams. I'm sitting up on the left side of my bed, and my dream self thinks that's strange because I always sleep on the right side. I look to the right and my grandpa is sitting there smiling at me. I'm overjoyed and hug him and I'm so happy. He tells me to go tell my mom down the hall that he's alright. I do that and bring her back to the room and she's beginning to smile when I wake up to my in the flesh mom getting me up for school. I immediately ask my mom if grandpa's okay and she says yes. I go to school in a really good mood because I think this dream means that my grandpa is going to get better. I come home from school and mom tells me that grandpa died that morning at about 4 a.m. I cry and tell her about the dream, and to this day she thinks that he was telling me goodbye. This isn't the first time I had a dream like this. I had a dream 4 years prior to this about my grandma on my dad's side. She had already been dead for a few years, but she told me that she was okay too. Although I did have to move some frilly packaging stuff from an upright coffin in order to talk to her. I used to live in an old house that was built in 1910. One night when I was home alone, I ran downstairs to grab a load of clothes from the dryer. As I turned the corner to go back upstairs, I saw a guy in a white t-shirt standing in the family room. Scared the crap out of me and I ran back up because I knew I was the only person home, and had the feeling he wasn't real. Fast forward a few weeks, and we have friends over for drinks. Halfway through the night, my friend turns to me and asks if the house is haunted. I ask her why, and she says she just saw a dude in a white t-shirt walk down the hallway. He never did cause any problems, just showed up those 2 times. I have one. So I stayed up waiting for my parents to get home one night because why? I'm laying down on the couch with all the lights off in the living room when I hear shuffling noises behind the couch across from the one I'm laying on. Me: dude, go to sleep, I can hear you trying to scare me, talking to my brother, or so I thought. More shuffling. Me: sits up bro. Go to sleep. Then I saw a boy stand up from behind the couch. It's dark so I can mainly just see a silhouette, but there's a boy standing there 100%. I'm not scared though. I'm just frustrated. Me: okay, I see you. Now go to bed. Nice try, brother, yells from his room. Who are you talking to? I am in bed. I let out the loudest scream of my life as I sat there staring straight at this boy. I covered my face with my hands and curled up in a ball on the couch and yelled for my brother to come help me. Lol. I ended up getting up and turned on the lights real quick. Scariest thing ever. Does hearing count? During my grandpa's funeral, the church played his favorite song, Driver's Seat by Sniff and the Tears. He always wanted it cranked up. During the song, no one near the audio, but it still got cranked up. It even startled the priest. Sometimes in my room I sometimes see a glimpse of something, like a body part. It was white and slightly transparent. I rarely see that, but I hear a lot more paranormal stuff than see paranormal things. I rarely hear footsteps in the attic, very rarely. When there's an open notebook laying near me, I hear tapping on it even though there's nothing on the notebook, same for pots and pans. I once heard a male voice say shut up in my room. It was at midnight, I assume. I sometimes feel it touch me. At night, I heard a male's voice say shut up and then I felt something stroke my face, forehead to ear. I also felt something touch my back when I was watching a YouTube video. And I also felt it push a strand of hair behind my ear. I also felt a slight slap on my inner thigh. Probably just night terrors, but when I was a kid the top of my bed was under my window in my room. When I was 6 or 7 I was laying down starting to fall asleep and began to drift off, when my blankets began to weight down on me. I tried to move but couldn't as it felt like something or someone was holding the blanket and sheets down. I snap out of my fog of starting to fall asleep and see a shadow cast on the wall from the window behind me. It was what appeared to be a horse or donkey's shadow. Only we didn't live anywhere close to where animals like that would be, and my window faced our backyard. It turned so it appeared to be looking into my room. I felt a coldness and as I started to freak out a light flips on in the hallway and the tension on my blanket prison releases. My mom is going to go use the bathroom. I get up and sprint out telling her about what just happened and she got mad and made me go back to bed for school in the morning. I think I did eventually fall back asleep, after crying for a while. So a couple years ago one of our cats, Toby, had gotten very old. We didn't know the exact age, but we knew she was older than 17. She had abruptly become seemingly very ill, and we knew she was at the end of her life. Our other cat who had always hated Toby, noticed too and became friendly, almost comforting to her. I had helped her with everything that day, and her greatest efforts included trying to walk. That night, she was brought into my parents' room to have comfort with the illness. That night, I dreamt of a shimmering figure with striking likeness to Toby, walking through a thick mist, meowing for what seemed like help. She turned her head and the second she saw me, I woke up with cold tears in my eyes. It was 4:07 in the morning. I knew she had died. I fell back to sleep. Somehow, I was awakened about 2 hours later by my parents, and before they could say anything, I said it happened, didn't it? They nodded and told me that they noted she had died just around 4 o'clock. My mom had passed away only a couple weeks prior to a road trip her sisters and my cousins took me on to cheer us all up. We were all almost asleep in our first hotel room of the trip when the microwave turns itself on. No one had even touched the microwave as we had gone out for dinner that night. After we calmed down we had a good laugh and said it was Mom saying hi. Hi Mom. I miss ya. We have this stupid redneck Christmas bear that starts singing a redneck version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. It starts out with a really loud hey y'all. This is relevant later. My family doesn't believe me and still taunt me with it to this day. A few years ago, I was in the basement with that godforsaken bear. Hearing it X amount of times because loud noises, motion, if you breathe the wrong way, sneezing, existing sets it off, well, it will drive you mad. So, I got into the habit of turning it off. My family turned it back on, and we had a cycle of turning it on and off. Whatever, I'm in the basement with this thing. It's dead silent in the house, and all of a sudden the loudest hey you all you can imagine, like a drunken redneck showing up to a Christmas party kind of loud, shatters the silence and my sanity. Then, it stops. There's the whole song behind it, but all this bear does is yell at me. I cross the room to turn the damn thing off. I pick it up, flip it over, and realize that the bear is already off. I looked at it and threw it on the ground before backing away. That in itself wouldn't be so terrifying, if it weren't for the fact that the lights went out right after that. There are 2 light switches in the basement to turn off that section of lights and I wasn't near either of them. My little sister was upstairs, my parents were upstairs, I was shitting my pants. I booked it. I don't think my little legs have cleared so many stairs at one time. I made my dad go down and check. He turned on the lights, he picked up the bear, he tried to get it to work, nothing. He turned it on and it started right up. He laughed at me and went back upstairs. To this day, I still hate the dumbass holiday bear. Got a few things to share here. First story comes from my parents. They had a night alone at home so they got a couple drinks and sat down for a chat. They were talking about my mom's relative who passed a couple weeks before since my mom was having hot cocoa, her favorite drink. My mom didn't touch her cocoa yet though, she set it aside after my dad made it. And they just watched a movie. They then took a small bathroom break, during which our dog started barking crazy. My parents got back and our dog was hiding. They said he looked mortified, he was even shivering. They checked around to see if someone was there or if something had happened, but everything seemed fine. They sat back down and my dad noticed my mom's mug was empty, so he asks her, "When did you drink the hot cocoa?" But she didn't actually recall ever drinking it. Another thing to indicate she didn't drink it was that the teaspoon that was inside the mug was laid out next to the mug. My mom never actually takes the teaspoon out of her mug, even after finishing her drink. Her cousin on the other hand always did. My next story is something I just don't know how to explain. Sometimes I even doubt this myself. I was staying over at my grandparents'. I was about 7 to 8 and I had to stay at my grandpa's office, which had this sliding door that would lead to a really long hallway filled with my grandma's paintings and art all over the walls. I got up in the middle of the night after a really bad nightmare and wanted to go wake up my grandma, so I pulled the sliding door over and it really felt like I shouldn't leave the room at all, as if something was holding me back, but I did anyways. But the second I stepped foot outside the room, some of the picture frames on the walls just crashed down to the floor, and I was screaming like crazy. I ran back into the room and covered myself with the blanket in hopes that one of my grandparents is coming to see what's going on. They did, but they thought I broke the picture frames and wasn't telling the truth because I was scared shitless. TBH, I wouldn't believe it either if it didn't happen to me personally. My next story is when I was around 9 or 10 and I was at my grandma's again. Mid-noon or so, she was cooking and I was laying down on the couch in the open living room/kitchen, talking to her and watching her cook her food. Then an orb that almost looks just like a bunch of lightning packed into a ball, just goes through the door, literally through the wood of a closed door. So I yell at my grandma to turn around, and she just looked as it passed through the closed window and onto the next building. We couldn't explain what happened, but we both shared the same mutual feeling while looking at it, like we just felt pretty calm and relaxed, even though it was fucking weird and unexplainable. And my last story is waking up one Saturday with a mad hallucination of some guy that looks really shady and scary at the edge of my bed just staring at me. I was 17 at the time and I just couldn't move or scream at all. It lasted for about 2 minutes and I was just in some sort of a shock even after it passed and I could move again. I knew a few friends who had sleeping paralysis, so I knew very well what was going on, but it felt so real I was starting to doubt it was a real life thing going on. Once when I was sleeping in my room at a house my friend and I was renting, I woke up and couldn't move. Sleep paralysis more than likely. My room was very dark, which was odd because there was a street light right outside my window. I heard a loud thud from around where my door was. I had a reading nook above my door with a ladder, so whatever it was, I'm thinking it came from up there. I could see a shadow moving quickly with loud footsteps from the door and to the side of my bed, and it growled into my ear. Terrified I was finally able to move, I got up and ran out of my room and down the stairs. My roommate's dog woke up and looked over at me and began growling and ran past me and up the stairs barking. When I went back up the next morning, my room door was closed. I didn't shut it and my friend was sleeping in the living room because her room was hot, so neither of us have been up there. Yeah, it was pretty scary and I never went into the reading nook again. Woke up to my alarm, which is an instrumental beat, but I was getting up and heard a guy in the song start rapping a full-on verse I never heard before. I was barely awake and didn't think much of it. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.